You're listening to the Murphology Podcast. Thanks for tuning into the Murphology Podcast. I'm your host, Kathy, aka Murph, and I am here to give tips and information about group bicycling and bicycle touring with a focus on the Midwest and hopefully provide some entertainment for you as well. Well, with me today is Dave Ihde. Hey, Dave, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Good. Well, I'm glad to have you on the podcast, a fellow Midwesterner. And we were just talking before we hit record that we're recording this at the end of October. And here in Iowa, we'll be experiencing our first snowstorm tonight. So I'm kind of dreading, but secretly a little excited at the same time.
Yeah, I'm mostly dreading winter, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah,
I guess it hasn't killed us yet, right?
exactly. Yeah. And for some reason, I continue to live here. So it's my own fault for
Yeah.
having to, change bikes mid-season so that I have a fat bike to ride in the wintertime. But like you said, that's a different story. But why don't you start out by saying where you live and what the biking culture is like there?
Okay, I live in the northern suburbs of the Minneapolis metro area in a town called Blaine.
Mm-hmm.
It's great for cycling. Being in the suburbs, I can be in the wide open in 15 minutes, and it's pretty open in our neighborhood. There's a nice combination of some paved trails, which if I'm riding with my wife, she would prefer to go on those.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer the open road, and in most places there's a healthy shoulder. So even on a 4-lane, major road, there's a shoulder, and I feel totally safe riding on it. So I got a lot of options. I can hop on my bike and go a number of different directions, and it's really nice. And I think nationally, Minneapolis has got some attention more for the urban cycling, and I've done a fair amount of that too. So overall, I think the bike culture here is great.
Yeah, and I've heard, like you just mentioned, a lot of great things about, Minneapolis itself, like down in the city, how great the cycling is.
Yeah, well, the one thing that I went to the University of Minnesota, and I lived in South Minneapolis for years, and then before moving up here, and I'd ridden on a lot of those trails, and there's really great trails going around the lakes that probably everybody's heard about, and up and down the Mississippi River. And in the last few years, the Greenway, which was a former railroad right of way that went right through southern part of downtown,
Mm-hmm.
is like, geez, that goes across town. It's like a super highway, and it's there's always people out riding on it. It's pretty cool.
Nice. It's definitely something I need to check out to take my bike up there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, how did you get into bicycling as an adult?
Okay, well, I grew up on a dairy farm in a small town in Wisconsin called Oconto. It's about half an hour away from Green Bay, so I'm a cheesehead at heart. Go Packers.
I was just going to say, are you a Packers fan too?
Oh, very much so, and they had a big win over Kansas City last night, so I'm still pumped from that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I live in Minnesota, so I got to be careful. I'll cheer for the Vikings too, by the way. But anyway, growing up in Wisconsin on a dairy farm, I mean, we lived like 5 miles out of town, and there wasn't that much to do. We did have dirt bikes, and we always had stuff to keep busy. But when I was about, I think, 16, I bought my first, at that time it was called a 10-speed.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered cycling, and, I could ride around, and I'm an introvert. I don't mind doing things by myself. So for me, it was kind of a perfect combination because I could get out, I could have some adventure, I could do it by myself, and it didn't cost a lot of money. So I was hooked, from my teens on.
Yeah, yeah. And I've done a couple of like group rides or sponsored rides in Wisconsin. And the thing I noticed was it was really hard to find a gravel road. Like even the smaller towns in between them, they were still blacktopped.
Right. And that's one of the things that goes way back. When I was riding, there were printed maps, way before the internet, back in the late 70s, early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And Wisconsin actually used to publish a set of maps that I think you got them for free from the Department of Tourism or whatever it was. And all those county roads, all named with letters, like, I grew up riding on County J, A, S, Y, and every one of them is paved, like you say. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is the agriculture up there, and farmers depended on those roads to get their stuff to market. And when I moved out to Minnesota, one of the interesting things is, man, you get out in the country and you're riding on gravel a lot. And I'm not a big fan of gravel, so I really appreciate having so many options.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved the cycling when I was there. And the towns were so well spaced apart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, if I may ask you, what rides did you do? Because I might have done the same one.
Gosh, it was probably 8 to 10 years ago, but it was called the AIDS Ride, and it was obviously a fundraiser, and it was fully supported. It was 3 days long, and I think we did, gosh, I'd say between 50 and 70 miles per day. And then they would set us all up. I think there was maybe 300 cyclists that did this. And they would put us in like school gyms. And
Yep.
so everybody would, have their yoga mat or their air mattress. So you wouldn't have to carry your gear during the day. But it was a really well organized ride. I don't know if it still exists.
I did a similar thing to that. Maybe some of your listeners may be familiar with. I think it's called GRABAR or something like that.
Hmm.
It's an acronym similar to RAGBRAI, but it's something great right along the Wisconsin River, and it went from the northeast corner of Wisconsin up at Eagle River to the southwest corner to Prairie du Chien
Ooh.
in 7 days. And that and we can come back to that because that was one of the pivotal tours I did 3 years ago that got me back into cycling in a big way.
Yeah, that sounds like a good one. Well, that brings me to my next question. What is it that you enjoy about getting on your bicycle and riding it?
I think for me, every time I ride, I feel like I'm a kid again. There's a sense of adventure. You talk to some people, it seems like, geez, here's one of the common questions I get, and it just makes me laugh. I'm in some small town. Last time this happened, I was up in northern Minnesota in this little bar, and it was the only place that was open, and I got a frozen pizza and a beer, and I'm sitting around, the counter talking to people, and one of the questions they always ask is, are you alone?
Mm.
And I say, yes, like, aren't you afraid for your life is kind of what they're implying. And then the second question a lot of them ask is, do you have a gun?
Oh,
And I'm like, what do I need a gun for? And it's
right.
like, well, what if somebody comes to, rob you? Or what if you see a bear or whatever? And I kind of chuckle because people think it's so dangerous, Now, riding out on the open road, whether you're on a bicycle or in a car, is, probably the most dangerous thing the average person will do.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, the adventure more than makes up for it. And camping, I've always loved camping. When I'm loaded down and hitting the road, just knowing that I've got everything with me and I'm self-contained. And if I don't have it, I can stop and get it, or I can get help along the way.
Mm-hmm.
There's just that sense of adventure and travel that just really, turns my crank.
Yeah, me too. And then knowing that, you have everything you need, like you mentioned. So you could stop early, you could stop late, you could keep going, you could, whatever you want to do. You could go
Yep.
have 3 frozen pizzas instead of one, or
There you go.
or 3 beers instead of instead of
Yep.
one. So the reason that I ended up contacting you about being on the podcast is because you recently did what I thought, based on the photos, was a pretty cool solo tour. And I was hoping that you could spend some time telling us about it.
Sure. So first I want to go back and tell a little bit of the backstory from like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, I got married in my early 30s, and we started having children right away. And we rode with the kids, and we had 3 kids under 3, and I had 2 burly trailers, and we pulled the kids everywhere. But in terms of touring and stuff, the ride was usually going to the park or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe every once in a while we'd go on something longer. So I kind of put it all in mothballs. And then 4 years ago, I was turning 55, and my brother said, "Hey, there's this ride I referred to earlier, GRABAR."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "You should do this with me." And I kind of looked at myself in the mirror. It's like, you know what? I'm not getting any younger. If I don't do this now, when am I going to do it? And I did, and I had the time of my life.
Mm.
And the first day was a 50-mile ride, but it had an optional 50 more for a century.
Ooh.
And I had been training. I think that was the first year I did the MS 150. If anybody's familiar with the MS rides, that
Mm-hmm.
originally started in Minnesota.
Oh, okay.
And next year is going to be the 40th anniversary of that ride, and I'm planning on doing that. But anyway, I had so much fun on that. And like you said, you didn't have to carry your gear.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come to these small towns and you sleep in the high school gym, or you could bring your tent, whatever. And I just had so much fun. And I kind of vowed to myself, you know what, till the day I die, I'm going to keep doing this till I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
So that fall, I did my first fall ride. So my goal is now every year, and this is the 3rd year in a row I did it, I want to do a week-long tour, historically somewhere, close by in the Midwest where I'm not driving a lot. I averaged, around 60 miles a day. And the very first one I did was I rode from Minneapolis to Madison, Wisconsin, where I
Hmm.
have some family.
Mm-hmm.
My longest day was 72 miles. My shortest day was just short of 50. And I basically, if any people from this area are familiar with it, they call it the Great River Ride, I think,
Mm-hmm.
where you go down Highway 35 in Wisconsin, down along the Mississippi River. And then you get down to near La Crosse, and then you cut east, and then you go on the Elroy Sparta Trail, if any of your listeners
Oh,
are familiar
yes.
with that.
Yep.
And I ended up in Madison. I just had the time in my life, and I was so spoiled because it was perfect weather, 80 and sunny every day.
Oh, nice.
It was after Labor Day. I usually go the first or second week after Labor Day, so I kind of got the run of the place, and it was just so gorgeous. I had so much fun. So that was the first year. The next year, last year, I went up and rode the Mesabi Trail up in northern Minnesota on the Iron Range between Virginia and Ely on the other side.
Hmm.
And I did that for, I think that was a 6-day ride. And then this year, I went in northern Wisconsin. I rode over to Vilas County, which I was on the internet one day, and this thing popped up on Facebook, I think, and it was a link to a thing called the Vilas County Trail, or Heart of Vilas County. That's what it was.
Hmm.
Vilas County is in northern Wisconsin near Eagle River, right on the upper Michigan border, and they touted this paved trail system that they had. You could ride across the county of Vilas, and it was about a 50-mile ride.
Oh.
And they said they had an off-road trail the whole way. So I rode 3 days to get across Wisconsin to get to it, and on the fourth day, I rode from the southeast corner of the county up to the northwest corner. It was a gorgeous day. The sun was out. I pretty much had the roads to myself, and it was a really great day. But the problem was then there was 3 days of wet rain in the 50s that came right after it.
Oh.
And I'm not ashamed to say I bailed out.
Yeah.
I called up my brother, and he came and rescued me. And I didn't, I'm on vacation. I don't want to be miserable the whole time. So
Right.
maybe I'm a fair weather cyclist, but it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah. And the scenery, any place in the Midwest, I think, especially if you, like you mentioned, you've got some rivers in there. It's got to just be beautiful this time, the time of year that you were doing it.
Yeah, the only bummer was it was kind of dreary the first 3 days. So wasn't as much fun as if it was sunny, of course. But a lot of woods, up and down, rolling hills. The highlight was I think it was the first or the second day I'm out. I'm going down the highway, and all of a sudden, it looked like a yearling bear runs across the road right in front of me. 20 yards in front of me, this bear just barrels across the road, and then 3 days later, I'm riding on another state highway in Wisconsin. And then this one was like a quarter mile up the road. I could see him going across, but it was a lot bigger and it was a lot slower. And I'm thinking, if I had been like 1 minute faster,
Mm-hmm.
I might have been going down the trail by the time this thing was deciding to cross the road.
Oh my
It
gosh.
worked out just fine. But when I tell people, oh, I saw 2 black bears out on the road, then they're going to start asking me if I'm carrying my gun with me.
Exactly. Or at least some bear mace or something. I guess.
Right.
I guess you don't want to get close enough that you have to use mace that's in your hand.
Yeah.
No thanks.
Yeah.
Well, what kind of places did you stay? Like, were you kind of stealth camping or park camping, or did you find hotels along the way?
No, well, so stealth camping is something that intrigues me, but I've never had the guts to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up, camping in my own woods back behind our barn, and doing that. But there's something about it, like if I don't have permission, I might not do it. But I do find myself looking off to the side of the road and thinking, no, that looks like nobody goes back there, and I don't think I would bother anybody. Someday I
Yeah.
want to do it.
Yeah.
It didn't work out on this trip. But typically what I do is I pull out Google Maps or whatever, and I just start thinking, okay, well, here's where I'm starting. If I'm going around 50, 60 miles today, where's a place where I could, find a place to camp? And in Wisconsin, man, they got county parks that are just killer for like, 10, $15 a night. They almost always have really nice hot showers.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lake. They may have a, picnic pavilion. And I stayed at county parks the whole way across. So I tour with a one-man tent. and I set up my tent every night, and it worked out great.
And you mentioned the bear encounters, but any other crazy encounters, whether it
Well,
be
that same day, I think I saw the bear. I saw for the first time 3 otters, which I think were otters.
oh
They went across the road like 20 feet in front of me. All
oh
3 of them right across the road. It's like I'd never seen otters like that before.
yeah
That same day, I saw. Well, in Wisconsin, it's not that rare to see flocks of wild turkeys. I saw an eagle. There's always wildlife out there.
yeah. And when you see this wildlife, what sort of terrain are you on? Are you on actual bike trails? Or are you on like highways or
No,
roadways?
this would be a county or state highway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So there's
yeah, right out in the open.
yeah. God, that's crazy. Well, let's get into the kind of bike that you ride when you're doing your tours.
Okay, I'm a recumbent rider. I have a Rans Stratus XP, which is the Rans Stratus is one of the oldest designs that were made, and the XP version of it, instead of the traditional one, had a 20-inch wheel in the front and a 26 or a 27 in the back. This one had dual 26s, so it rolls a little better.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked it up used a couple years ago at a good price. I do have a fairing on the front of it that helps cut the wind. I've been riding recumbents for about 20 years now, and I don't know how familiar your listeners are with recumbents, but there's several different styles. There's
Right.
what they would call a long wheelbase, which is what my bike is. It's quite long. I do have a special rack that carries it. But I've also ridden and I've also made some of my own bikes. In fact, the first recumbent I ever made, the biggest thing about recumbents is they're just so damn expensive. So there was a local recumbent club, and I got hooked up with one of those guys who had a brazing torch, and we took some 10-speed frames and cut them up and brazed them together, and I made
You made your own. Wow.
recumbent. Yeah, which
Wow.
was, and it's not that hard to do, but it's a clone of in the industry is a bike made by the company Tour Easy. It was an easy racer, and I rode that bike for years, and then I made myself a short wheelbase bike, which is basically the same wheelbase as an upright bike.
Mm-hmm.
And then I actually bought one, and then a couple years ago I ended up riding a long wheelbase bike, kind of by accident, and I found out, man, this thing is so comfortable. It's long. It's kind of got a natural suspension to it. Goes straight, really well, and any of the little bumps you hit, it handles them really well. So I've been riding recumbents for a long time, and I've tried to go back. Like I have a conventional comfort bike. I take the grandkids to the park on and stuff like that. But if I'm going to go ride all day, I can't do that anymore. My neck hurts, my shoulders hurt, my hands go numb. I just find that it's not comfortable for me anymore.
And when I, obviously, I'm sure everybody knows that a recumbent is a bicycle where you're actually sitting with, you have a backrest or some sort of neck rest or something like that. But what I always think about when I see recumbent riders is how you can get the pedal strokes to help you get up hills. It just seems like it'd be a different skill set in your muscles.
Yes, very much so. So one of the things that I like to tell people is, if they hadn't seen a recumbent before, it's like a lawn chair on wheels.
Yeah.
So it really is that comfortable. The weight is off your hands, and if you have your bike set up right, when I'm at the end of the day, I'm riding my 70, 80 miles. I'm tired. My muscles are tired, but I'm not structurally tired because I was uncomfortable in my position on the bike. So that's a big plus for me. What was your original question again?
Oh, when you're like going up hills, like I feel
gotcha.
like, sometimes I can stand up and really give myself some, extra oomph.
Yes. Now that, in my mind, that's probably the biggest negative about recumbents, because your upper body does you absolutely no good. So you can't pull on the handlebars and get leverage from your hands. You can't stand up and put your body weight, on climbing up a hill. And you can't get your butt up off the seat if you hit a bump.
Yeah.
So it's kind of tricky. So when I switched to a long wheelbase bike, the bumps on the road aren't that big of an issue anymore. But climbing is slower. Okay, so recumbents, you go out and you look on the internet, you'll find people that will, debate this. Now, if you're a super fit rider on what they call a high racer or a high performance recumbent, there are guys out there that can stay with and go faster than club riders on their carbon bike. So there are guys that can do it, but for an average guy like me, okay, I'm 30 pounds overweight. I'm reasonably fit, but I'm not crazy. If I hit any hill, I'm going to go slower just because of the weight thing, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then if I got 40 pounds of gear on my bike, I'm going to go even slower. So what you do is you shift down and you spin.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got, a really low gear. I think it's down I got a 20-inch low gear inch. So I'm in my granny a lot. When I'm touring, my credo is when in doubt,
Yeah.
shift down and spin. And you can put a lot of strain on your knees because you can push up against the back of your seat. But if you keep doing that, you could do some damage because there's nothing, to take the weight off. Like on your regular bike, you can only push down as much as gravity will allow, right?
Sure, yeah. And I guess, in the grand scheme of things, it's, like when I'm on my fully loaded touring bike, of course you're going to be using the granny gears a lot more than when I'm on my carbon road bike with nothing more than a spare
Right.
tube on it. So I guess it's all relevant to the actual bike that you're on.
Yeah. Now I make up for it on the downhills. Downhills are a total blast on a recumbent, especially with my
With the
my
fairing,
fairing on the front.
yeah.
A couple years ago, I set my personal speed record at 47 miles an hour,
No way.
and that was on my old short wheelbase bike without a fairing. So I'm kind of waiting for the next big hill that I can really crank it up, and I think I'm going to go over 50 on it. So we'll see.
I hope your wife's not with you when you do that.
Yeah, no, she would never do it. And I wouldn't do it if it was like a twisty road.
Right,
I got to be able to see, where I'm going, and it's
right.
got to be in good shape and everything.
So when you're looking at your bike and you're doing your tour, give us just like a brief idea of, where do the bags go on a recumbent and how many do you have, that sort of thing.
Sure. So there's a company out of Portland, I believe, TerraCycle, that makes aftermarket parts for bikes, and particularly recumbents and trikes. And they make something called an under-seat rack. So I bought one of their racks and I mounted it. So my center of gravity is very low. So I sit on my seat, and with my feet, on the ground, my panniers are directly beneath me. So
Okay.
I've ridden on when I started touring, I was on a conventional bike, and I remember, the first couple of days you get out there and you got your panniers on your back rack and your sleeping bag on the top rack. That was kind of in the day when low riders and front panniers were just kind of starting to be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just feeling like, man, this bike handles so squirrely now.
Yes.
And you get to be really careful. And when I'm on my recumbent, man, it handles pretty much the same. I feel the weight, but in terms of the handling and everything, it feels almost like I'm unloaded. So that's a pretty big plus.
Oh yeah.
And then since my teens, actually, I grew up with 4 sisters and a mom that all knew how to sew, and so I learned how to sew. And so I've been making my own panniers and cycling shorts and stuff over the years, and I'm on my 5th generation. So I made my own panniers, and they're big enough. I made them. The interior dimensions are 18 inches long, so I could fit my tent in there without having to take the poles out or anything.
Genius. Very
So
smart.
I got 2 bags, and everything fits in there. And then I have I use one of those Helinox lightweight cots. It weighs 2.5 pounds, and you gets you off the ground. That it gets bungeed onto my back rack. Otherwise, everything is either underneath my seat in my panniers, and I do have it's a seat that fits over your seat back, and it's curved and aerodynamic, and I keep a bunch of stuff in there too. So it looks it's a really nice clean look. Nothing's hanging off the bike.
Yeah.
And I can carry everything I need.
Any luxury items that you carry that maybe you shouldn't, but you just do?
Over the years, I kind of have my list of all the stuff I bring. Now this year, I knew it was going to be colder, so I brought an extra layer of wool and I brought a fleece top. In the middle of summer, you don't need any of that stuff.
Right.
But I travel pretty lean, and I always make sure I have snacks with me. I guess that's not a luxury item, but you got to have enough to hold you over in between towns. And,
right.
But I'm fairly Spartan.
It's a good thing to be that way. I always, you pack up all your junk in your bike and then you're like, okay, I got to take 10% of this out. I don't need all of those extra layers. Like you said, if it's summertime, you don't need 3 jackets. You just use one and use it over and over again. So
right. And I know you're geared toward beginning tourists.
Yeah.
The most common thing that I would say beginners do is you bring way too much stuff. And that's true of whether you're backpacking or going on vacation or whatever. It takes a while to figure that out, but when in doubt, leave it out, I
Yeah.
guess is one thing you could say.
Oh my gosh, you should put some copyright on that.
Oh, there you go.
Well, you mentioned, the tour you did with your brother, and then of course your solo tours. Have you been on other bike rides with the recumbent tour, in tour mode?
Yes. So I mentioned the MS 150. I've done that, I think, 3 times now. And twice I did it with my wife. We have a recumbent tandem, believe it or not. Rands makes a bike called the Screamer, which is about the same length as my single bike. I'm the captain, and I sit kind of over the front wheel, and
Mm-hmm.
my cranks extend over beyond the front, and then my wife sits in the back in more kind of the position of my single bike would be.
Oh, okay.
And we've done that. We did that 2 times. Most of my riding is solo,
Mm-hmm.
so I will have a hard time finding somebody that wants to go on a tour with me. Like the last time I went out, one of my buddies, he came with me for half a day and rode till lunchtime. We had lunch together. Then he rode home.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always open to riding with other people. It just doesn't work out.
Yeah. So when you're out on your own, do you have any must-see places or favorite places that, maybe people listening would be like, okay, I've got to go to Minnesota and see that, or Wisconsin, or...
Sure. Well, the Elroy Sparta Trail is the oldest rails to trails in the whole country,
Yeah.
which it's got 3 tunnels on it. The longest of which I think is 3/4 of a mile long. You can't see the other end of it when you go in, so you better make sure you bring yourself,
Lights.
a flashlight. But that's really cool. The only downer on that one is a crushed limestone surface. It's not
Mm-hmm.
asphalt, so everything tends to get gritty, especially if it's wet at all.
Well, what advice would you give first-timers trying out overnight biking?
I would say get out and do it.
Yeah.
The chance for adventure and trying something different should override any of the fears that you have, or maybe you think, geez, I don't have the right amount of gear. I think I was reading on your website, or you just talking about, or maybe it was one of the other podcasts. It's like, don't fret over the gear. If you don't have panniers yet, or if you don't have a, super lightweight tent, whatever, use what you have.
Right.
And you might throw your stuff in a backpack, which I wouldn't recommend, but for your first time, if that gets you out there and doing it and trying it, great, and pick a modest goal. I remember the first time I was a student at UW Green Bay, riding to my parents' home. It was like 25 miles away. 25 miles was like, I don't know if I'm going to be alive when I get there. I thought it was such a big deal,
Right.
And then I did it, and I was like, that wasn't a big deal, But if I had said, well, I'm going to go on a 100-mile ride my first time, or 50 miles even, I got no concept of that. I would have probably gotten discouraged and quit, So start small enough where it's still fun,
Mm-hmm.
and enough that it's a bit of a challenge, but not so much that it's going to, demoralize you.
Yeah. And even from the small amount of time I've been talking with you, you have a really positive attitude. So like when you're out there on a solo trip, you kept commenting about, it was just really fun and I got to see things and I could stop when I wanted to. So a lot of it is definitely attitude of, like you said, your 25-mile route, you might not make it, but I bet you had fun doing it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, I don't do it like to impress anybody, but, let's face it, if you come in, to work on Monday morning, people said, well, what do you do this weekend? I said, oh, I rode 50 miles and I camped in so-and-so and rode back the next day. And like, these people think you're doing some superhuman effort,
Right.
And it's like, I was out having the time of my life,
Yeah.
And it was great.
Yeah. Well, when you think of, kind of back to beginner touring, do you have any do's or don'ts that come to mind?
If you don't know how to work on your bike, have it tuned up and make sure it's all in working order, because you go out and start doing something like that and putting extra weight on it, if your wheels aren't true, or you don't have good tires, or your gears don't work right, that's not the time you want to find that out.
Right.
So make sure your bike's ready to go and you know how to operate it, and that you know how to fix a flat if you get one. I've been out and people, get a flat tire and they've never changed it before. It's like, well, that kind of sucks to be you right now, but I'll help you, show you how to do it,
Right.
but you better know how to do that basic stuff. And then that increases your confidence too, right? You're not so worried about, what if something happened.
Yeah, definitely. And, when you get out there on the trails, you don't always have phone service. So you can't just assume that you can call a friend or, find a bike shop close by. So
Right.
the basics, you can go to your local bike shop and ask them to show you how to change a tire, or, how to make sure there's enough oil on your chain, or just little things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in this day of the internet, everything's on YouTube's. If
Oh,
you want to
yeah.
find it, it's out there. One of the questions you had on your prep sheet that I wanted to talk about was if we had any interesting mechanical situations,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
did,
Yeah.
and it was interesting. So 2 summers ago, on the last day of my tour, I use clipless pedals. I use Speed Play Frogs, and they have a unique cleat that clips in. And I found out halfway through my morning, my left foot kept coming off the pedal, and it was just driving me nuts. And so finally, I stopped and looked at it, and there's two little tabs on there that kind of hold it on, and one of them had worn through and broken off. So
Oh,
it was the last day of my tour. I had maybe 25 miles to go. It wasn't a big deal. I just put my foot on the pedal and I made it. It was okay. Well, this year, so I went home and I bought a new pair of cleats, put them on. Everything's great. Well, this year I'm on my second day out, or it was my third day, and my right foot starts coming off the pedal, and I'm
oh,
doing a fair amount of up and down climbing, and I pull on my pedals a lot, and so it was really starting to drive me nuts. And I thought, oh no, I know what this is. My cleat's going bad, and here I am out in the middle of nowhere. What am I going to do? So the cool thing was, I was riding into Minocqua, Wisconsin that day, which is, a tourist hub up in Vilas County, right on the edge of it. And they just happened to have a bike shop in town
ah,
who just happened to carry a pair of Speed Play cleats, that the exact ones that I needed. So the owner wasn't even open that day. I happened to catch him while he was in the shop. He said, "Yeah, come on down." I went down there. He gave me an Allen wrench and helped me put the cleats on, and I sat and talked with him for a little while. It's like my whole tour was saved. It
yeah.
would have been really terrible. So now the lesson learned is I'm going to buy myself a pair of spare cleats, and
Some
I'm going to just
backups.
keep them in my kit, and then hopefully that'll never happen again, and I'll be ready for it.
Yeah, it kind of always ends up that way when you have a mechanical issue and you go through, a tough time with it. You definitely fix it so it doesn't happen again. And like you said, having a spare set, or like I now duct tape a couple spokes into
There
my
you go.
back rack, so I
Yep.
don't even know they're there. But if something happens with one of the spokes, at least I can, grab one quick and
Yeah. Well, that's not easy, but at least it would get you home, right? Or to the
exactly.
next town.
Yeah, yeah. Well, do you have any bicycling adventures on your horizon or maybe set up for next year?
I'm a part of Adventure Cycling Association,
Oh,
so I
yeah.
get their bi-monthly magazines, and you read these stories of people that are, they sold everything and they're cycling around the world, in their 50th year or whatever. And I don't know if I'll ever do something like that, but the one thing I've always said I wanted to do, and I'm not sure if I'll make it happen or not, is I wanted to do a transcontinental ride.
Hmm.
So that's kind of always in the back of my mind, and maybe that'll be, when I retire. But I've talked to a number of people that say, they were maybe right out of college and they went and, rode across the country, and they said there's two kinds of people you see. You'll see, college students, and you see retirees,
Hmm.
because they got time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But you could do it in 2 or 3 months, which wouldn't be terrible, even with regular vacation time and maybe a little time off. So that's something I'd like to do. Until then, though, my average ride is a 25 mile ride around my neighborhood somewhere. I get home from work and hop on my bike, try to do something longer on a weekend when I can. And, at least sometime over the summer, I want to do at least a week-long tour.
Yeah.
And I'm a happy camper.
Yeah, I was going to say, even those 20 milers, sometimes, the scenery and just seeing people and being on your bike. And now it's, the leaves are falling and it's just one of the best times to be on your bike.
Yeah, so unfortunately now it's getting pretty cold. Not last week and the weekend before, it was really nice, and I got out and got a 30 miler in. Right now, the bike's back in the shed, and I don't know if I'll get it out again because now, it's getting cold, but
Mm-hmm.
we'll see. Maybe we'll get a nice weekend.
Awesome. Well, Dave, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was really nice getting to know you and hearing about your solo tour, and I hope that you continue that trend of doing one each year.
Yeah, Lord willing, and the
Yeah,
body holds up, I want to be out there doing it.
that's right. Well, thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Well, how about a touring tip? Let's talk simple bike adjustments to make your bicycle tour even more enjoyable. So first up is saddle adjustment. When you ride your bike, your hips should stay level as you pedal. Have a friend ride behind you, and if they notice your hips swivel back and forth as you ride at an easy pace, your saddle is probably too high. Even if you're not feeling pain with this extra movement in your hips, you're working harder than you need to. Make small adjustments to your saddle height until your hips are level as you pedal. Knee pain can also occur because of saddle height. If your pain is in the front or inner part of your knee, your seat may be too low. If the pain is on the outside of your knee, the seat may be too high. It can take multiple small adjustments to get it right, so don't give up. And speaking of knee pain, another simple adjustment you can make to avoid knee issues is to keep your cadence at 70 to 90 RPMs. If you're in too hard of a gear, your cadence will be much slower and your knees will suffer. So how about numbness in your hands? When I ride a long time, I sometimes get numbness in my pinky fingers. There are many causes for numbness in the hands. A simple bike adjustment that can help is to adjust the angle of your shifters or brakes. This simple adjustment will change your riding position just enough to possibly help alleviate numbness, especially if you're always hovering over your brakes or shifters. Oh, back to your saddle. Making slight adjustments to the angle of your saddle can change how your weight sits on your bicycle, which affects your wrist and hands. I find if I shift my body position back on the saddle, I do notice a difference in my hands. Another easy fix is to double wrap your bars with good bar tape. It helps reduce road vibrations on your hands. And while you're at it, buy a pair of cycling-specific gloves to help further absorb bumps on the road. A side note here, be sure to wash those gloves regularly because they can get really gross really quickly. A few adjustments you can make to your riding style would be to loosen up on the handlebars. There's no need to white knuckle while pedaling on easy flat terrain. Also, move those hands around to different positions on the handlebars. Try not to spend too much time in one position. I give my hands a good shake every once in a while when they start to feel tingly. Neck pain is a pretty common complaint from cyclists, and most neck pain is from sitting in an awkward position for a long period of time, kind of like when you fall asleep at a weird angle while watching TV on the couch and definitely suffer the next day. If you think about it, when you're on your bike, your head is tipped upward and it's supporting the extra weight of your helmet. So first, make sure your helmet fits properly. An ill-fitted helmet can create additional neck discomfort and stiffness. On your bike, there are many adjustments you can make to help your neck feel better. Once again, seat height plays a factor, but also handlebar height. You can easily have a bike shop adjust your handlebars to be higher and easier on your body. Also, small adjustments to your pedals and cleats can make a huge difference. Your goal is to put your entire spine in a good position. So check your form. Pull your belly in, make your torso long, and keep your chest lifted slightly. Also, keep your chin tucked in. Keeping your core fit will help tremendously. The stronger you are, the easier it will be to keep your body in alignment. So to sum it up, there are hundreds of adjustments you can make to your bike to help you enjoy your ride. Experiment on your own with small changes, or better yet, go to your local bike shop and consult with an expert. You know, the more comfortable you are on your bike, the more you will want to ride. That's this week's tip. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Check out murphologypodcast.com to find all kinds of great info, and email me at murphologypodcast@gmail.com. I appreciate your time today, and thanks for tuning in to listen to the Murphology Podcast. I leave you with this quote from the unwritten book of Murphology. This quote comes from Steve Jobs. "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." Think about it.